Ron Markezich, welcome to the Running Effect podcast. How are you doing this morning?
Great, Dominic. Excited to be here. Couldn't sleep last night. I was so excited to be on here with you.
I'm flattered. Talking with your kids and knowing your kids, they are all coffee enthusiasts. So I have to ask, as the father, one, do you drink coffee? And two, what is the drink of choice this morning or in general?
I only started drinking coffee 2 years ago. I never drank in my entire life. My dad grew up with Folgers instant coffee. I think that turned me off immediately. But I started a new job 2 years ago. We traveled a lot, and I needed coffee just to stay awake. And I go for a cortado. I went all in. You can taste the beans. You can kind of really enjoy the flavor and the differences of coffee. So that's my go-to drink.
For you these days, what does a normal morning routine look like other than doing a podcast at 7:30 in the morning?
Well, ideally, I get up and go run 4 miles. I've got a little 4 mile loop from my house. So I'll get up, go run, do a little email in the office, in my home office, then head into Seattle where we have our main office, do some work there. And then, it's nice in this hybrid world, which I didn't grow up in, kind of flipping between home office and main office is actually kind of nice.
We'll get into shortly your start in the sport, but I'm curious, those first few years of running, if I was to tell that version of you that you'd be, running into your 50s, would he have believed me?
No, running, we can get into this more, but running has been just such a blessing and gift in my life, and I think those first few years of running, all you're thinking about is what races do you win and what PRs do you set. But then looking back, I think running is much more than that. It's a lifestyle. It's a way to meet new people. It's a way to expand your network. It's a way to impact lives. It's a way to make friends and deep relationships. That's much more important to me looking back over my time running.
Let's go back to that day, that start in the sport. What was that first run like? How'd you get into it, and what were your first impressions of the sport?
We've spent my dad worked for General Electric, and so we spent a bit of time moving around to different cities. And so in middle school, I was in Mount Vernon, Indiana, which is very southern Indiana, right on the Ohio River, not far from the Wabash, so right kind of next to Illinois and Kentucky. And you're in southern Indiana, you're playing basketball. And so in sixth grade, I was 5'9", and I'm 5'9" today. I haven't grown since sixth grade, but I was a center on the basketball team in sixth grade. And so that was my life. I love basketball. It was a huge sport in Indiana. But I don't know if they do this anymore. They used to do this presidential physical fitness test in all the schools, I think, across the country. And you had to do push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups. And one of the things you had to do is run a half a mile. And so I had never run at all other than on a basketball court. And so I went out, they had us run a half mile, and I got second. The number one guy was like the total jock in the school. He was best at any sport. So there's a big gap between him and me, and I got second. And then there was a big gap between me and third place. And so I thought, I should try out this running thing. And it was unfortunately an end of the school year in sixth grade. So track and field it was almost over. So I said, in seventh grade, I'll sign up and run track and field.
You mentioned basketball being your first passion, being 5'9" in sixth grade. As someone who played basketball in sixth grade, I would have been terrified as an opposing team if I was playing you. What was the realization like when you shifted focus from basketball to running and maybe realized that, this growth spurt is over. My days here are numbered.
I think at that age, you like things you're good at. And so I remember my basketball coach sitting down with me at the end of seventh grade, and he's like, everyone's catching up in height. They have more talent than you, so you might start thinking about other sports. And that's when track came in. And, my first race, I don't think I even trained for it. I went to J.C. Penney and we bought some Nike shoes that they were like these suede uppers. I mean, they're horrible running shoes. I had silk shorts. Silk shorts were big back then. And I went and ran. I remember that first mile. I think I ran 5:05 as a seventh grader. I just felt
Oh my
easy,
gosh.
won by a ton. So I'm like, this is my new sport. I'm good at this. So in a way, it was kind of a curse, though, being good at something immediately, because you actually don't appreciate what it takes to actually really be good. So it just came very easily to me. So it was a very easy transition as everyone else got taller, and I was a good runner.
I want to ask you about this. I've discussed this with my dad before when I was getting into running, and I was like the only kid in my family who ever like really was super competitive past middle school and running. And so I think I bought my first pair of shorts and my whole family was confused and making fun of me. But my dad made sure to note that that was basically what they wore for basketball back in the day. And then we've
That is
transitioned
true.
towards longer shorts. What's your impression of that? And do you remember those days where basketball was short shorts?
Yeah, short shorts and long socks. It's weird how the world has changed. I'm just glad there were not cell phone cameras back in my childhood days and some of the clothes we wore.
Do you feel like you learned any valuable lessons from basketball and from being on a team that then transitioned you into being unbelievably accomplished right off the bat? I mean, 505 is still good in this day with super shoes in seventh grade.
I liked the team aspect of basketball. I liked the camaraderie. I liked, winning. And I think I was very coachable. I remember we played this team, New Harmony, and they had a guy that could only dribble going right. And so the coach was like, okay, Ron, your job is to make sure he doesn't, dribble right. And so I basically was guarding him, not even between him and the basket, between him and the stands, the fans, just so he can go right. And it worked great. And I thought, oh my gosh, these coaches know what they're talking about. I just need to listen to them and I'll be okay.
Present day, a kid listening probably looks up to Jakob, uh, Cole Hawker, Kipchoge.
Yard.
Yeah, exactly. Yard. Back in the day for you, if you followed running in seventh grade, first off, like, was there anything that you could follow? Was there a magazine or something? And two, who were those people you looked up to, if any?
Yeah, there are great running times, track and field news. I used to keep every copy of. I think my parents finally threw them away. We had stacks of them. The person I looked up to is a guy named Craig Virgin. Have you ever heard of Craig
Oh,
Virgin?
yeah. Illinois legend.
And that's right. And I was in Southern Indiana. My parents grew up in East St. Louis, Illinois, and he was from a small town called Lebanon, Illinois, which was just about 20 minutes from East St. Louis. And kind of a farm guy in the country, kind of a solo guy. He went out to Oregon for a year and then transferred back to Illinois and did his college career in Illinois and then was multiple cross country champion, et cetera. So he was who I looked up to. It's kind of funny because I think I was probably like seventh or eighth grade, and they had a race in St. Louis that was a handicap race. I wish they did this more often. Based on your age, you got a certain amount of a head start. And so Craig Virgin got no head start. I forgot what I got. I probably got 5 or 6 minute head start, maybe even more. And you're passing people the whole time. And I got to the lead and it ended up at Busch Stadium where the Cardinals used to play. And I looked back with 100 yards to go and there's Craig Virgin hunting me down. He outkicked me there in the last 50 meters. But that was thrilling. I almost beat Craig Virgin as an eighth grader when he was at the peak of his career.
If you could do that with two athletes, present day, the handicap model, who would they be and what would the distance be?
Oh my gosh, I need like 30 minutes if I had a handicap model. I kind of seen this through my life with my kids. There was a time in my kids when I go out and runs with each one of my kids, and I just start trying to hammer it and hurt them, and I could do that. And now if I run with them, I get injured. I get a hammy issue right now. But I think I'm a big fan of U.S. distance running. I think U.S. killed it in the Olympics. I think they have three guys in the top five in the 1500. I'm a big Yard fan, having known him since he was a freshman at Notre Dame. So I'd love to have a handicap 1500 with Yard, but I think I would need like a 3 lap head start. I'll do the last 300. He does the whole 1500 at this point.
So seventh grade, 505. I'm curious to hear about the transition from middle school to high school because again, even that, like I think I ran 505 in eighth grade and I was a bit of a hot shot coming into high school. How much of a hot shot were you coming onto your high school team? What did that look like? How many members and what was the transition like for you?
Yeah, the funny thing is, so seventh grade, we actually moved from Mount Vernon, Indiana to Buffalo, New York. And so I had to totally change. So I had this great season of running and, my dad took another job in Buffalo, and I was a big baby at the time. I thought it was the end of the world. I'm leaving my friends. I'm leaving what I know. And we get to Buffalo. We didn't do it for the run. A lot of people were like, "Oh, did you move to Buffalo for better running?" Clearly didn't, because the school district we chose had never made it to the state meet. And 2 miles from our house was the school district that was a perennial state champion. They won every year. And so we got there, and as an eighth grader in New York State, you can run with high school. So right when we moved there, I joined the high school team, which was fantastic because as an eighth grader, now all your buddies are like high school guys and you're super cool. And, everyone's like, oh man, he's running with a high school team. And given that our team wasn't that good, it was actually kind of nice for me because it was a big ego boost. I was, right up there, number one or number two guy on the team, and, had these instant friends. It was one of those things for me where I said it's almost a curse. It came so easily when you're young, and so it came easily as an eighth grader, ninth grader. Um, and you never really knew what it took to bear down. So that transition for me is easy. And it was a nice way in a new city to make friends, because you make them in middle school, but you also make all these great friends up in high school.
I'm not quite sure how it worked back then, which is part of the reason I'm asking, but let's call it summer running or over the weekend or when there wasn't structured practice and you wanted to run with a friend. What did that process look like? Because there weren't iPhones back in the day. Did you have a home? Like, how'd you reach them?
Yeah, I know. I don't know how we lived and survived back then, right? We had like big paper maps, and I think we just did phone calls. I don't, like, so I hate running by myself. You get used to it as you get older, especially when you're working, because it's hard to match schedules. But growing up, if I didn't have someone to run with, I probably wouldn't run that day. I loved running with people. It was a social thing for me. And so that team called Clarence, that was the next school district over, had great team, great people to train with. And so I got plugged in with them right away. And I think we just used the landline at home and called. We used our bikes a lot too. You probably see pictures of all the bikes in the front yard. So you use your bikes or you use the landline, and call and meet up. And so that's how I kind of arrange runs. And then a lot of times you do something, kind of every Saturday morning. You meet up. We drive to this place in Buffalo called Chestnut Ridge, which had hills, and you kind of go train down there. But it's a lot of phone tagging, a lot of not getting a hold of people and leaving messages with mom or dad.
My dad has talked about, so he was one of five boys, and he tells a story that in classic dad form, I'm sure he exaggerated to a large extent, but he would say they woke up and they were basically out of the house playing sports all day until the dinner bell was rung. What were other things you were doing in the summers outside of running, or were you just focused on improving your running, recovering, just that?
Oh no, I think it is true. You're outside all the time in the summer, and especially in Buffalo, where the winters are so brutal. You take every advantage outside in the summers. We would do all kinds of, we do a lot of stupid stuff. I don't think high school kids have changed in 40 years or however long it's been. You do a lot of stupid things. We'd go out, we had go out on the golf course. We'd go in the ponds and go find golf balls. Go dive or fill them with your feet and go collect golf balls and then sell them out there. I had a paper route. You have to deliver papers in the morning year round, whether it's winter or summer. We would do a lot of kind of just hanging out, playing basketball, shooting hoops. We did a little golfing out there, but we didn't really want to pay to golf, so you'd sneak on the course early or late in the day and hope they don't chase you off the course. There's a lot of I don't know, back then it's like, oh, you want to get a buff as a kid. And so everyone had their weight sets on their back patio, and you'd be on the back patio lifting weights with each other, which is kind of embarrassing for me because I was like the scrawniest guy. But kind of, I don't know. I don't know if that's similar now. There are no video games, so we didn't spend any time with that, which I think was a real blessing.
What were the hot hits back in the day, those summers, off the top of your head? Eagles, like
Oh,
Journey.
God.
Who was on the radio?
Well, you have like, oh gosh, I mean, it's funny. It's like Sting, the Beatles or Sting, Police were big. Not the Beatles were before me, but the Police. My first concert was Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA tour. If you remember, if you've heard of that one, where he has the music video. Courtney Cox comes on stage. MTV had just come out, which you kind of that was kind of interesting. ESPN just came out, and so that was cool. So you could watch some sport events whenever you wanted. So
I'm curious to hear about training through those winters, or if you didn't train through those winters. So the first 7 years of my life, I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is right on Lake
oh,
Erie,
yeah,
so not too far from.
yeah.
And I know Buffalo and Erie have very similar weathers. Nearly impossible to run through the 2 feet of snow you get quite frequently. What were those winters like, and were you running at all throughout them?
Oh yeah, what the thing with New York State is they have a serious indoor track season, and so indoor track is a big, big. There's a state meet. It's in the It used to be in the Carrier Dome where the Syracuse basketball team played. So it's a big deal. we would train. You'd go outside. They did a pretty good job of clearing the roads in Buffalo. They knew how to use salt. They had snow plows. The hardest part were the track workouts. So we would run in the school, and it was basically a square loop inside the school hallways. You have to watch out because the doors open up into the
Oh
hallway,
no.
and so you have to make sure you're not hugging the corners too closely. But I remember running like 10 miles in there, and I can't remember how many laps it was to a mile. It was probably like 10 loops, 12 loops to a mile in there. But we would do track workouts and long runs when you couldn't go outside inside that. And it's amazing we didn't get more injured because you're doing these 90-degree turns.
If you can
every half
remember, when were treadmills introduced?
Oh gosh.
Did they
First
exist
time I
back
remember
then?
I never even used one at Notre Dame. I think the first time I used one was in Chicago. I had a buddy that worked at the Hilton in Chicago, and they had a gym, and he could get us in to use treadmills. But that was well after competitive running.
In the age of information and knowing from the podcast and friends and my own experience how hard kids train these days, I'm really curious to hear about like back in the 80s what you were doing. So what was training like? Were you doing triple threshold or was it like 20 miles a week?
I training was totally different. You basically would do long runs at whatever pace you feel like. I did not have any predictive type of training that was very specific. And your interval workout, you did a lot of interval workouts, 2 or 3 interval sessions a week, and it was all at race pace. Like there's no idea of threshold or tempo. It was all race pace. And the problem was you'd have people you train with, and they turn into races. So you go out and you do like 10 400s at mile race pace. It was one of my problems with my girls because the circumstances turned out where they did not have a coach or junior and senior high school track. So I coached them and I just knew what I knew. So I'm like running them through these workouts, like it's race pace. You do ladders, start at 400, go up to a mile, work your way down. So I totally trained them wrong.
If you could take one aspect of training from back in the day and implement it into 2024, what would it be?
Oh gosh, the one thing I would be is, easy. You don't have social media. I think it was wonderful that I think it was easier to get rest. You didn't have a screen to tempt you at night to scroll through. When you went to bed, you went right to sleep. Maybe you listened to some music, but you fell asleep to the music. So I don't know that there's a training thing, but just a way you lived your life thing. There was not much screen time at all, which I just think gave you more hours in the day, made you more productive, and I think made you just more sane.
What would Strava have been like back in the day? Do you think people would have
Oh
eaten that
gosh.
up or no?
Well, Strava back in the day was this. I still use it. It's your running log. I don't know if you know. This was I've got like 30 of these. Jim Fix's running log was your Strava, and every day you look forward to every day writing down your workout and what you ran. So I use Strava today, but I still use the old school paper running log.
So I'm assuming other people in the area, in the nation, use that. Were there ever attempts to like steal a competitor's training log, look through it, or were there ever times where people met up and they went through, oh, here's what I did on Tuesday, here's my workout last week?
Yeah, it was so hard to do that. You're really just meeting up locally with people, and yeah, there's a lot of that. Like that Clarence team I talked about. Um, we would get together, and a lot of times I just do workouts with them as well. I'd go over to their team and do workouts. So you'd steal a lot, but it'd all be local. It wouldn't be, you're not calling someone in California from New York to find out their workouts. It's kind of word of mouth locally.
Clarence, you've mentioned them a few times, training with the team, being friends with members on the team. Was there ever any sort of drama with your own team about, you running with those runners? Because back in high school, I didn't have anyone too serious, and just running with other people on the weekend, I think teammates got frustrated by it. And it's like, well, you're not running with me.
Yeah, no, there was no drama with it. And, I think one of the great things about running, it's just such a sport of camaraderie that spans teams. And so, everyone got along. Everyone liked each other. You're going to homecomings for women on the team, girls on the team from other schools. And so it's kind of just this, like you probably have today, this running community that, everyone just got along together. They wouldn't typically go train with the other guys because, you'd be doing harder workouts. So they're like, eh. And so, they were fine just doing their easy workouts and, kind of getting through the day.
A lot of people know the career and accomplishments at Notre Dame, but I don't think they know what led into that. So take me through the high school progression and what got you in a place to be recruited to run for a place like Notre Dame.
I want, I was saying kind of things came easy. I ran 905, 3200 my sophomore year in high school. And that was fast back then. Now it doesn't even get you anything. But um, I also won the state meet in cross country my sophomore year, won a couple indoor miles. I don't know if this guy, John Troutman, he ran at Georgetown. He was Olympian in Barcelona. He was like my main competitor in New York. So we kind of would trade off during that time. But if you're a New York State guy back in the '80s, you either you looked at Dartmouth, Georgetown, and Notre Dame. Those were the three schools, and the three coaches there were these three Italian guys: Joe Piani at Notre Dame, Frank Gagliano at Georgetown, and Vin Lanana, who you probably know of at Dartmouth. They're best of friends. They're still best of friends, and they're super competitive. So it's kind of fun looking back. You visit all three schools, and those guys are calling each other after, just giving each other grief if they lose a recruit. But I actually had the longest, I think it's the longest recruiting visit in the history of the NCAA when I visited Notre Dame. I visited all three schools. You're only allowed to stay for 48 hours. It's, they put on their best foot forward. It's great thing. But when I got to Notre Dame, I spent my 2 days there and I had to fly through Detroit. So I flew South Bend to Detroit and I got stuck in Detroit because January of 1985, there was this huge snowstorm in Buffalo. And you didn't have cell phones at the time. So I got this sleazy hotel near the airport. I stay in there and I get a call from Coach Piani at Notre Dame. He's like, Ron, what are you doing? Are you home? He actually called my parents. He said, oh, how's Ron? I want to talk about his recruiter visit. They said, oh, he's not home yet. He's stuck in Detroit. So he called the hotel. He's like, you idiot. I'll get you a plane ticket back to Notre Dame. Don't worry about the rules. So my Notre Dame visit was 8 days because the airport took that long to open up. But for me, all of a sudden, the first 2 days I stayed in a hotel with another guy, Bill Babcock from New Jersey. And then I stayed in the dorms. One of the guys at Clarence High School was there, a guy named Dan Garrett. He was a year older than me. I stayed with Dan. Nicholas Sparks was, who's an author now, was my recruiting host. I, hung out with him. And I really got to see Notre Dame during that 8-day visit, during that time after the official 48 hours. And Notre Dame's just a special place. It's unique from any other school. I could go on and on about it, but that convinced me to go to Notre Dame. Actually, that second 6 days after my official 48-hour visit.
You mentioned Vin. One of my favorite stories from this past summer is going to these high school national meets and like the U.S. trials. For whatever reason, our hotels linked up. So at Brooks PR, I was at one in Seattle. He was at the same one, and then our one at the trials linked up. And he was in the gym every single morning, just ripping it on the elliptical in some form, just sweating into his 70s. I was like, I have the utmost respect. It was just funny seeing him because the first day there was a high schooler in there who high schoolers these days don't know they just know him as like coach at Virginia. And I was like, is that Vin? And he was like, I don't know. So I looked up a picture and I was like, yeah, that's definitely Vin. And he was just like ripping on the elliptical. I was like, oh, this is great. Yeah,
That's awesome. He's a legend. We were at a meet once. I don't think I ever told Vin this. I see him a lot at meets now. It's great to catch up. But we were at a meet once, and Piani, our coach Joe Piani, had such a competition among those guys. But Piani's like, oh, I'd love to have Vin have no sleep tonight, so he shows up to the meet. So we were, super tired. I don't know. We were out to like 2 or 3 a.m. We knew Vin's door. We went to his hotel door and started banging on it, and then we ran into our rooms because we're like, "Here, helping out Piani, make sure Vin doesn't get any sleep."
You mentioned that 90.
These college kids haven't
no,
changed.
They haven't. You mentioned that 905 sophomore year, as well as winning some state titles. That's pretty early on into a high school career. Do you feel like that helped you and set you up for those next 2 years, or do you feel like it set an unrealistic expectation that you had to live up to?
Yeah, I think it does hurt on expectations. I think I didn't. Let me think here. I did improve my PRs, but not that much. I think when you run 905, you're like, oh, I'm going to run sub 9. And sub 9 back then you're like top of the top. There were not many guys in the country running sub 9, and I never broke 9. And so I do think it kind of sets those expectations. It's one of the things like in today's world, I don't love the BU track. I think you run that BU track, you're like, oh man, I ran this amazing time, and it's so hard to replicate elsewhere. And so I think you have to be careful about just those unrealistic expectations.
If you could, I asked you a question about the 80s, bring it to 2024, reversing that. If you could take one thing we have in present day and bring it back to high school Ron, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, everything. I mean, the type of core we do now, the type of strength training that's now, the physical therapy, massage. Like I thought massage was just like witchcraft. I didn't think it was anything of value. My son, I have 4 kids, a boy and 3 girls. 3 of the 4 ran in college, actually, through high school and college. My son had IT band syndrome, couldn't get rid of it for like 2 months. We went to see this guy, Mark Fadil, in the Bay Area. His daughter actually runs for Boston College now. And in one visit, he got rid of his IT band syndrome. It was unbelievable, just through a really deep tissue massage in his glutes. And none of that stuff was unheard of back then. MRIs, we had no MRIs. Um, so it's just so much more advanced now. And then it's not to even mention, not even talking about the shoes. The shoes are so much
I
better.
have to ask you this. If that recruiting visit was the planned 2 days and not 8 days, do you think you still would have ended up at Notre Dame?
I don't know. I may have. I My dad was really against Dartmouth because there was no internet at that time, but there was a book called the Preppy Handbook, and Dartmouth was ranked the #1 party school in the country, and so he thought I was going to go to Dartmouth and just become a partier. But Georgetown was super appealing too. Listen, you can't. I think you can't go wrong. When my kids were looking at these colleges too, like you can't go wrong. Like all these schools, the coaches are like now, especially now, the coaches are incredible across all of the, even D3 schools, which you wouldn't like. I never looked at a D3 school, but I've had all my kids look at D3 schools as well, just because the coaching is so good. And I don't think I could have made a bad decision even back then.
You go on to Notre Dame, incredibly successful career, All American, school record holder in the 10K. Fill out some of that story and some of those pieces from those 4 years.
Well, when I got there, I'll tell you, I think running, throughout your life is a vehicle to grow personally. And I certainly grew personally at Notre Dame. The first 2 years we were horrible as a team. One of my criteria for a school was that they made the NCAA cross country meet the year before my senior year in high school, and Notre Dame made it for the first time. It's the first time they ever made it. And I got to Notre Dame. We were horrible freshman year. We were even worse my sophomore year. My sophomore year, we were 15th at regionals. And if you know, regionals were pretty much the same as they are today. Like schools that had 0 scholarships were beating us. We were so bad. I'll tell this funny story to say kids haven't really changed. The regional meet, it was super muddy that day. And we were horrible. I actually DNF'd. The only race I ever DNF'd in. But we had this turn, and this guy from Eastern Michigan was next to me, and he fell on me. I twisted my ankle. My ankle
No.
ballooned up. I go back to my hotel room, and before we even left for the meet, some of my teammates took Ben Gay. I think we have Icy Hot. I don't know if we have Ben
We
Gay
have Ben
now.
Gay
Icy
to this
Hot.
day. I used it in high school.
Put it in my underwear. They put it in
Oh,
my
no.
underwear. And so I showered. I can't walk on both legs. I'm hopping around. I put my underwear on, and I'm like, what's going on? And it just starts burning. And they not only did that, I was kind of a little bit of a chubbier runner, and they wrote on the back of my underwear, "Fat Boy." And so I'm hopping around in this underwear, and I didn't know what it was. And it was horrible. It was like the worst day of my life. But the thing that was kind of changed everything for me is Coach Piani then, after that meet, he got a bunch of the guys one-on-one into his room, and basically just read them the riot act. So in my meeting, he's like, "Hey, Ron, you're wasting your God-given talent. You're not taking this seriously." And it really was like impactful for me. And at that point, our culture was so poor, we would be blaming others. We wouldn't be taking responsibility for our actions. We didn't take things seriously enough. We thought things were going to come easily. And it really changed my whole outlook, and it changed our entire team's attitude. And so a year later, my junior year, we made NCAA meet, but not only did we make the NCAA cross country meet, we got 7th as a team. So we went from 15th in regional to 7th as a team. They do those coaches awards every year, and it's always the team that won National Coach of the Year. It's Lori Hennes, it's Mike Smith. Well, back then it was Joe Piani for 7th place at the NCAA meet because his team was 15th at regionals the year before. That was how big it was. But the other thing that happened at that meet is Dan Garrett, one of my buddies from Clarence High School, who we went way back with. He was 6th overall in the NCAA cross country meet. I think I was like 42nd, but he was 6th. And that was, for us, it was like, oh my gosh, we can be as good as anyone. Like, he's up there with the big dogs that we always just kind of looked at and said, oh, we could never be that good. And so I think a couple of things changed. We grew confidence. We started taking things seriously, and we took accountability and responsibility ourselves rather than be victims.
I think you mentioned some of the things there. and I've never asked this question before in the 400 episodes of the podcast. A lot of times I ask people, what are attributes of a successful team, yada, yada, yada. Sometimes it's fun to invert it. So I want to ask you, because it seems like you were mentioning some of these things in your response there. To someone listening out there, if they wanted to ruin their team and make sure their team was not successful, what would you do?
Blame the coach. Say the coach doesn't know what he or she is doing. It's the number one issue. I think that's the number one issue as a parent as well, is that you get an attitude or have an attitude among the parents or the athletes that the coach does not know what they're doing and they're a bad coach.
Interesting. I like that. Let's talk about this school record run in the 10K. Take me through it. What do you remember from that day?
Well, it was back in those days, we didn't have the big like Mount Sac, Brian Clay, these big invitationals. Everything was regional. And so that meet was my 10K PR was at Dogwood Relays. And we didn't have pacers either. There were no pacers.
Wait, you're telling me they didn't have wave technology back then?
No wave light, no pacers. And so it was Dogwood Relays. East Tennessee State was really good back then. A lot of Irish guys on that team. And this guy, Thomas O'Gara, took it out. I ended up running 28:44. If I remember correctly, he took it out in like 14:30, and so maybe even 14:32. So I had a nice negative split. It's kind of like 14:12 second 5K, and I let him lead the first 5K. So I just sucked off him for the first 5K, and then took off the second. I don't know if you have those races. I've probably had like 5 or 6 in my life where you feel like you don't hurt, like you could go sprint the whole time. And that was one of those races. Like last 5K, I felt like I was all out and I didn't feel any pain at all. It didn't hurt at all. And so you get done, it's like, wow, 28:44. I think our school record before that was like 29:30. It's amazing how times have changed. But that was a great night. And, it's those, you long for those feelings as a runner where you can just go all out.
Which race is more meaningful to you, that 10K school record holder run or that All-American in cross, if you had to choose one?
I think the cross country runs, both our junior and senior year, because we were 7th and 9th as a team. And, for a team that it was only our second and third time ever at the modern day, Notre Dame actually won the NCAA cross country meet in like way back when, in like the 40s, I think it was. But in the modern day, this is the second and third time we made NCAA cross country, and to get 7th and 9th as a team was a big deal. You always look back. Like I remember that meet when I was 11th in NCAA. I was 11th at NCAA's. You look back and you're like, oh, I could have run better. Everything is so close, right? 5 seconds gets you like 5 places. It's like, oh, I could have been 6. But it was super cool because Olivia's first All-American title, she was 11th at NCAA's in cross country, and her teammate was 9th. And when we ran it, my teammate Dan Garrett was 9th and I was 11th. So it's like, oh, it was made to be.
If you ran 5 seconds fast, I would have set a unreasonable expectation for Olivia then.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So doing some research for this conversation, I think I looked up your name in Notre Dame, and one of the things I came across was an article from June 9th, 1989, and I didn't even know we posted articles that far back on the internet. And just in all caps from the Buffalo News. I was also confused because I didn't know you were from Buffalo, so I was like, why is the Buffalo News posting about this guy? So the title was all caps, stress fracture derails Markezich injury, keeps Notre Dame star out of 10,000 meter at NCAA meet. What was that like, closing out your NCAA career with an injury, and what were the emotions there?
It was painful. I think everyone experiences that. I ran 28:44 at Dogwood Relays earlier that season. That's back then you got qualified for the national meet based on your time from the year, not from a regional meet. And so that qualified for the nationals. It was the second fastest time in the country that year. So I thought I had a legit shot to win it. I had started feeling some pain in my fibula leading up to the meet, but it wasn't something that kept me from training. The national meet that year was in Provo, Utah. So it's at altitude. So we actually went out like 10 days before the meet, because you either go right before the meet or you go out 10 days to adjust to altitude. And during that 10-day period, it just started getting worse and worse and worse. We ended up, I mentioned we didn't have MRIs at the time, but 2 or 3 days before the race, Coach Piani's like, okay, let's take you to the hospital and get an x-ray. And you know how stress fractures never show up on an x-ray. So I go and get an x-ray. It showed up on the x-ray. You could see the fracture of my bone on the x-ray. And so it came down to, do I get a shot and run through it or not? And the problem with a shot where it was is there's a nerve there. It's high likelihood you hit the nerve and you get something called drop foot, where you lose control of your foot and you wouldn't be able to run at all. And so I couldn't even run on it at that point. I remember watching the meet. It was just super depressing. I also had lined up races in Europe that summer with New York Athletic Club. I was going to go race some 10Ks in Europe. And so those plans were foiled. So I had a job offer. And so I ended up accelerating my start date and going and starting work while I was recovering from the stress fracture. I just went and started my career.
What are some ways you got over that disappointment? I'm sure it stung. And what would some advice be to someone listening out there who is going through a disappointment to close out a chapter?
Well, best thing I did was just get started work right away, get onto something else, right? I didn't go back to campus. I didn't go drown myself in my sorrows. I went and started working. And, honestly, I look back now, however many years it's been, and God's plan is always better than my plan. My life turned out far better, I think, because of that stress fracture than had I competed, gone to Europe, race. Honestly, I would have never met my wife had I not had that stress fracture, never had the four wonderful kids I have. I wouldn't be living in Seattle now. Like, everything would have been different. Maybe it would have been fine. Maybe it would have been great as well. But it's like those moments, it changes your life. And you don't realize at the time, you're like totally disappointed and heartbroken. And I look back on it now, I'm like, oh, it's the best thing that ever happened. I started a career that I loved. And that was 1989. A big recession hit right after that in 1990. People were getting laid off, job offers were getting rescinded. It was really hard to get a job. So I got into the job earlier before that recession hit, which I don't know that would have happened had I not had that stress fracture. So I think you got to dive into something else, and then also make sure running is not your life. If running was my life, like if I had no job, I didn't interview for a job, I didn't have a career to go focus on, it was just running, I think it would have been much, much harder.
Do you have any regrets from those years at Notre Dame? And if you could go back and do something different or change one thing, would you? And if so, what would it be?
Yeah, I would have entered into the school and taken things more seriously. I thought things would come easily to us. Um, I would have had more confidence. I think the difference between All American and non All American in the NCAA is confidence. I think everyone's fit, everyone's talented, everyone can run amazing. Is if you have the confidence, I think you'll be up in that All American tier. And if you don't have the confidence, it's hard to break into that. I saw that with my kids. Once they grew the confidence, the training didn't really change, but their performance accelerated.
Diving into something I'm excited to, which is kind of your work in corporate life. On paper, you're definitely the most successful guest I've ever had on The Running Effect.
Probably the oldest as well.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Okay.
You haven't won that category yet. Maybe if I have you on in like 15 years, you can take that one. But on paper, like, I'm curious, all the things you've accomplished. 24 years at Microsoft, current CEO of your own company that you started, I think, 7 years ago. Would you have foreseen those things coming out of college? And to what extent do you think the skills you learned from running were applicable to the things you applied in your corporate life?
No, I would have never imagined that. I mean, I was, you talk about now as imposter syndrome. I think everyone has that. I had that at Notre Dame big time because, running does help you get into school. I would have never gotten into Notre Dame academically had it not been for the running, but you really feel not that smart. And it's hard to get through. You're like, oh, these people are so talented. They're so smart. I loved it when I had a class with football players. I'm like, okay, I got some people to hang with. Um, so when I started work, I felt like, oh gosh, am I going to be able to do this? Um, it's funny though. I did 10 interviews at Notre Dame. This is when they would come on campus to interview you. And I only got one job offer out of those 10. I only got one second interview out of those 10. It was now the company's called Accenture. At the time it was Anderson Consulting. That's the only interview we talked about running in. And the guy that was interviewing me just liked running. He just started asking questions about my time at Notre Dame and running and blah, blah, blah. And I got that job. And I feel like running has played a part in the entire time, not just in growing me personally and helping me, but also just it helps expand your network. It helps get you known. It's a unique thing, not that common that people have run in the NCAA. It becomes interesting to people. And so my career has just been beyond any of my wildest dreams. Um, I've loved it, and I also loved working. I mean, I right that day after I got that stress fracture and just started working. I loved it. It reminds me a lot of cross country. Honestly, you've got a team. It's a lot about culture. You've got to work together. You have to have great communication. You're accomplishing big things. You're setting out goals. And I feel like, hey, my entire career is, I think I've been working for like 35 years. It's like that's 35 years of my cross country seasons continuing during that time.
It's kind of a specific number, but you're an incredibly wise guy, so I can put a number on it, and I know you'll come up with something interesting. If you had to pick three attributes that most runners learn from their running and apply them into non-running things, so we'll call it a job or work, what would they be?
Oh, that's a good one. I can answer this a couple different ways. Let me do two answers. One, I think one is building confidence. I think just like I was mentioned in the NCAA being All American at work, it's a lot about confidence. You don't realize no one really knows what's going on. Like you come in and think you're the only one that doesn't know what's going on. No one knows what's going on, and so you got to be confident. The other thing is work ethic, and the third thing is how to deal with failure. And I think you have all of those in running. I think there's another aspect as well, which I think goes to a deeper thing, which is why do you work? Why do you run? I think you work for three things. Ultimately, you grow personally through the experiences. You help others grow personally through your interactions with them, and you can impact your community, your city, the world based on what your role is in a positive way. And I think that's true for running as well as through your career.
As I mentioned a minute ago, you were at Microsoft for 24 years. I'm not even 24, so I'm incredibly impressed by that number. I want to hear about how did you stick in it that long? Obviously, you ascended throughout the years into high levels of leadership, but 24 years, how did you stick with delayed gratification long enough? And can you just speak to that aspect of, if you stick at something long enough, you work really hard, people will see your value. And a side note here with Nike's new CEO, I think very similar situation where he started out as an intern, the lowest
Yeah.
possible position in the company to now the CEO.
I I loved Microsoft. I loved when I worked at Accenture. I loved Accenture. I didn't think I'd ever leave there, but I had one kid and another on the way, and you have to travel a lot with Accenture. So I joined Microsoft, so I didn't have to travel that much. We were living. Microsoft was my client with Accenture, so I was 24 years as an employee there, and also 3 years as a if you had my consulting. Actually, that video you see it on YouTube of the Microsoft people, Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, and people dancing on stage where they're really dorky.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like White Boy Summer or something. I was at that event. That was the Windows 95 launch in 1995.
No
It's
way.
like my first month at Microsoft. It didn't seem that dorky when you're at the event, but now you
Sure.
look back, you're like, oh, that was really bad. Which is another reason I'm glad there's no video, no camera, cell phone cameras when I was growing up. But I just enjoyed it. I really loved it. The thing I love too, I learned this in consulting. With consulting, you go to a lot of different projects and you do a lot of different things. I kind of took that type of career at Microsoft. I was in IT. I was chief information officer. I was in finance, marketing, sales. I was in almost every function at Microsoft, which allowed me to just learn new things. And if I look at someone that is kind of starting their career, thinking about their career, never wait till you're ready to do something to do it. Do it before you're ready because you learn way more. It's way more fun when you go into something, you have no idea what you're doing. And then you get to figure it out and it really allows you to grow personally. So for me, that was what kept me at Microsoft is I had opportunities to go do things that I had never done before, well before I was ready to do them. And they gave me there's a little patience. I didn't screw things up too bad. And I was able to do things well enough to keep around and have another shot to go do something brand new.
One of my favorite sayings is most successful people aren't talented, smart, or lucky. They just acted while everyone else talked themselves out of it. And I think there's
Yeah,
a lot of truth
totally
there.
true. Totally true. We have the saying. I have the saying in our family. I always drain in my kids. I don't know if my wife loves it, but it's like, just go figure it out. Like, don't sit here and ask me or look on me. Just go figure it out. And I think that's so much of life. You just gotta go figure things out. And if you have the confidence to go jump into something you don't know what's happening, it's far more rewarding, and you grow so much more from it.
I probably shouldn't share this. Maybe we'll edit this out because this might sound kind of brutal and not represent my mom in the best light, but my mom had this hilarious saying, and my mom's my favorite person in the world, amazing individual. And, but because of that, we'd always go to her for things. Mom, how do you do this? Mom, what should we do here? Yada, yada, yada. And she would always say, what would you do if I was dead? Which is basically like, figure it out. Like,
Yeah,
if I wasn't here, what would you do? So,
yeah, my statement wasn't as morbid, but figure it out.
something.
Stop, and I think you get paralyzed in analyzing things. I'm like, also, you go figure it out. Don't spend forever like trying to figure it out. Just go start. Trial and failure is the best way you learn. Like, you can adjust as you fail and get to the right place.
Something I want to ask you about. One, how would you define success? And two, within that, everyone wants to be successful in some way, shape, or form. To a listener who wants to be successful and do successful things with their life, where should they start? Where would you guide them to take that road?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things. When I think of like my mission in life, like I was never like, oh, I'm going to go be an executive at Microsoft or CEO of a company. My mission was always, I want to have a healthy marriage and raise a family and have kids that contribute to society or whatever you want. But, just have a health. That was always my mission. It wasn't be an Olympian. It wasn't anything else. And I think work is a means to that end. It's not, just like running, you don't want to be your life. I think it's very easy to make work your life. And like I mentioned before, when I think of a successful life, it's, who did you impact? How did you grow? How did you improve your community? That's what I would focus on versus let's go this way. And everyone has different talents and passions. You're like, my wife actually was an actress in Hollywood. She followed her passion. And you kind of have to go to what you love, and then you figure out how to make money from it. May not make money right away, but you figure out how to support yourself based on what you love and enjoy doing. I tended to like working on teams. I like accomplishing things and building things. And I found a career path that allowed me to do that, and then allows you to support yourself. But if your goal is to go in with a mission to make money, the mission to be rich, it rarely works out that well, and you're rarely happy, I think. I talk at university a lot, and a lot of times you get these questions, and almost always they say, how much money do you make? And it's like, okay, you're focused on the wrong thing, dude. It's always a guy that asks that too.
I'm sure. Yeah, one of the crazy statistics is, and we'll replace numbers for money, 90% of podcasts don't make it past episode 3. And I think it's for the very reason that people want the numbers immediately. And they start the podcast for the numbers, when in reality, if I was in it for the numbers, oh my gosh, I would have given up so long ago.
Totally.
And anyone
That's a great point.
Makes money is in it for the right reasons.
When you started the pod, you probably didn't know what to do. You figured it out. And then you probably feel like you feel so great. It's like, hey, what I do is do it. I figured it out.
Yeah.
I grew personally. I think you hit all of those. You grow personally, you impact others, and you impact the community through what you do. You're a perfect example of that.
Thank you. Another thing I want to talk about, and this is a hot take, so if you disagree, feel free to. Something I've always, frustrated is a strong word, but we'll use it for lack of a better word, frustrated with in the running community is good runners in the NCAA will try to string out every ounce of their running career to the point where they take a $40,000 contract out of college and they try to squeeze way too much out. By the point they're 30, they don't have too many real life skills. Running didn't work out, and they're just kind of in a tough situation. You certainly kind of went the opposite path, definitely worked out for you. And then, not to bring your family into this, but I will here, like Andrea is another example where I have no doubt she's going to do some crazy things in running still. So not to discredit her there, but I thought it was awesome when she took a job because someone in her position definitely could have gone the other route. What's your general take on, even if you're a really good runner, viewing the full picture and making sure you're making valuable decisions and looking ahead to the future and not being too short-sighted? Or do you disagree with me?
No, I totally agree. I've talked, it's been fun for me because one of the things I did with Olivia is I was her agent in her NIL deal as well as her pro contract. And so you get to talk to lots of people in the industry. And a lot of people are like, there should be a minimum pay for a run. Like if you can't make a minimum amount as a professional runner, you shouldn't even, you should go to a different route. There should be a minimum salary like they have in other sports, right? It's a minimum salary because I think their feeling is it kind of sets the wrong expectations for some people. Listen, and there's amazing stories. Dakota Lindworm is a perfect example, right? She's an amazing. There are always those. So I'm not here to kind of dampen anyone's dream or anything, but I think what I would encourage people is there's a lot more to the life than running, and running can be a complement to your life rather than become your life. And I think too often with running, because it's such an amazing sport, you still feel so great about it, it becomes your life, and it dictates your mood, it dictates your relationships with people. I think you got to look at running as a complement to your life, regardless of whatever stage you're in, high school, college, post collegiate. It's something that complements your life. It does not become your life.
You held multiple roles at Microsoft, but in the few ones I read about, there was one where you oversaw 2,000 people, and then there was another one where you oversaw 3,500 people. And I always love talking about leadership and, what makes a good leader, all of those things, because it is such applicable wisdom to the audience who we probably have a bunch of team captains out there. So to someone listening who only has maybe 15 people under them and 7 really serious people under them, as someone who oversaw 3,500 people, what makes a great leader, and what are some things that person can apply directly into their leadership today to take that team to the next level?
I think, well, first I'd say is I think your role as a leader is not dictated on how many people work for you. I would say some roles at Microsoft, I was much more influential in the company and a better leader when I had very few people. And then some roles I might have like 3,000 or whatever. And I think you can be a leader with no one working for you, and you can be a leader with 2 people working for you, because it's your influence you have among others. I think to be a good leader, you want people to follow you, but you need to be leading them the right direction. You don't want to lead them off a cliff. You need to lead them to something that is beneficial for them and beneficial for the company. You have to be authentic. You have to integrate your life and your work, and you have to share what makes you who you are. You have to share. I often, we don't have time on this podcast, but I, often with teams will share, challenges I had growing up and things that made me who I am today, and why I make decisions, why I think like the way I do. And then you have to be a good communicator. You got to communicate well and frequently. Which is also, like everything I just said, totally translates to even when I go back to the Notre Dame cross country days. Those are characteristics that build a great cross country team as well.
Transitioning to talking about your fatherhood and your kids, putting you on the hot seat here. 4 kids, they're all going to listen to this episode. Growing up, let's say before the age of 10, which one did you think had the highest potential in the sport of running?
I actually, before the age of 10, I don't think any of them had potential. Okay. Jordan, my oldest, I almost said him, but in 7th grade, he was a back of the pack guy. He ran cross country, and he'd be way in the back. And I remember when I went to his first 8th grade cross country meet, the leaders came by, and I'm like, okay, Jordan will come by in another 2 minutes or so. So I'm just kind of like hanging out. And I'm like, wait a second, Jordan's in that lead pack. What happened? I really thought he cut the course short. Like, okay, but no, he had this huge jump. But Jordan always was my oldest is the boy, the only boy. He was always the one that was really into running. Andrea and Olivia, who became very accomplished, would sit there at the dinner table and listen to us run. I think just falling asleep and just waiting to get excused from the table to leave.
Anyone who is passionate about running and runs themselves, I think if they're not parents already, and I talk about this with a lot of the elite runners I have on when they talk about having kids one day or have really young ones at the moment, like how they plan on introducing the sport or if they want them to never be introduced to the sport. How did you kind of navigate that in your own personal fatherhood of how'd you just go about that dynamic of running and fatherhood?
I never asked them to run, never encouraged them to run. I didn't care if they run. Like I said, I didn't think they had any talent in running. And so I wanted to make sure they got exposed to any sport, lots of sports. I wanted to make sure they did something, an activity, a sport. And for me, it was never about the titles or anything about that. It was about friends and relationships. I think I may have mentioned, if I look back over the history of the sport, for me, the most important thing has been friends and relationships I've made. I wanted them to have those experiences. Each one of them ended up choosing for different reasons to join cross country, which is a great entry point into the sport. But they totally did it on their own. One was Jordan was an ice hockey player, Andrea was a rower, and Olivia was a soccer player. And then they all chose to do the cross country team, and then Jordan loved that, and then that became their main sport.
I've read this quote on a few podcasts recently, so I want to get your take on it, or maybe if you disagree, a rebuttal. But I've never brought it up with a parent before, so I'm curious to get your take on it. So the guy who wrote it, his name's Chris Williamson. He said, "One of the most common dynamics I see amongst high performance is this. Parents want their child to do well. Parents encourage their child to do well by praising when they succeed and criticizing when they fail. The child learns that praise and admiration is contingent on succeeding. That lesson metastasizes through early adulthood into, quote, I am only worthy of love, acceptance, and belonging if I succeed, end quote. Now powered by an internal feeling of insufficiency, this person is driven to achieve many things. They're prepared to outwork, out-hustle, and out-suffer everyone else because they're not just running toward a life they want, they're running away from a life they fear. Success and progress ameliorates the feelings of insufficiency. Therefore, success and progress become prioritized above everything else."
Oh, see, I don't like that quote.
No?
I think you're saying you should only praise when you have success.
No, it's saying that basically it's a trap he sees parents fall into, is that they only
Oh,
praise their kids when they.
oh, good, good.
Yes.
Okay, so
So
yeah, I agree. I think,
how did you parent against that is what I'm curious about.
yeah, well, one, I wanted to make sure the sport was never their life, and your relationships came before the sport. Um, the second thing is, even when a kid doesn't perform well or anyone doesn't perform well, there's positives in that. And I always look for the positives. And when you perform well, there's always areas you can learn as well. I think Coach Sparks is fantastic about this at Notre Dame. He is never too high and never too low. It was like Olivia won the NCAA Steeplechase title, and Sparks was like, you'd think, oh, well, he did cry a little bit. But other than that, he was kind of even keel. Even when if she had a bad race, he would kind of be never too high, never too low, which I think is great. I think you can learn from your success, learn from your weaknesses. I looked at it when one of my kids may have been disappointed about a race. It was really looking to that race to say what were the positives in it. There's always a positive, and the positive may be, hey, you met a new person. Positive may be, you figured out, hey, you actually need to sleep the night before a race, or sleep is actually good for you. There's always some learning or some positive.
You've mentioned a few times the aspect and importance of confidence. As a dad, what were some ways you tried to instill confidence and self-belief in your kids?
That's hard because parents never get trained on how to be a parent. Like, talk about go figure it out. You got to go figure it out. Like, if you wait to the people that don't have kids are people that they're waiting to be ready to have kids. You're never ready to have kids. You have to just go figure it out. So I didn't have a grand master plan. I think a couple of things for us that built confidence. Maybe I felt like my wife and I really try to be a team and show a healthy marriage and a healthy relationship to the kids. My wife was great at emphasizing family dinners and time together as a family, but it's not like we sat there and just praised our kids. We really, encourage kids to, encourage things to talk about at family dinners, and like family dinners did. My wife was really good about encouraging road trips as a family, and we were really good about our families were not in Seattle, they're in Buffalo and Chicago. So we were really good about every year we'd go and do a trip to Buffalo, a trip to Chicago with the kids. Those are things that you're not sitting there saying, hey, you're amazing, Jordan. But I actually think that builds confidence as kids see parents working as a team, as they see their family members together. I think it builds confidence in that there's a support structure among them across many different people that all are rooting for them. So I think that family net that you show and display is super helpful for kids' confidence.
Talking about the twins, when did you find out ahead of time? Did you find out when Mrs. Markezich gave labor? And how'd you guys come up with the names Olivia and Andrea?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so two quick things. My wife, we didn't. They're the third pregnancy. My wife, when she got pregnant, was opening up eggs all the time, and they're double yolks. And she was having dreams about twins. So we went to the first appointment where they do the ultrasound. The doctor's like, "Oh, healthy heartbeat sounds great." And my wife said, "Would you be able to hear two heartbeats if I have twins?" And the doctor's like, "Why? Do twins run in your family?" She's like, "No, but I've just been opening these egg yolks and having these dreams." I'm like, "Okay, Debbie, you're nuts. Don't like." And so the doctor ran and got an ultrasound machine. It's like, "You're right. You have twins." And so never, and the doctor actually said, I've so many times when women know they have twins before the doctor does. This is just premonition that they have. So that was crazy. What was the second part of it?
The
I don't
names,
know.
Olivia and Andrea. How'd you come up with them?
Oh, okay. My wife, their names are a sentence, and so they're named this way for their birth announcement. It goes Olivia Grace and Real Joy. So it's Olivia Grace, Andrea Joy. It makes a sentence. Olivia Grace and Real Joy.
Interesting. I like
That's
that.
how they are.
Bridging fatherhood and talking about your working years, you mentioned family dinners, how they were important. I can only imagine how crazy your life was at Microsoft. How hard was it to balance those two things and be home to dinner on time when you had probably some client mad at you or some situation you had to take care of?
I give a lot of credit to Microsoft. Microsoft's a great place to raise a family. I think some of the stories you hear about Microsoft, like, you're working, Bill Gates is sleeping in the office. That probably was the case in the startup days. Microsoft really does respect people's boundaries and lives. The other nice thing with email, because a lot of corporate America is run on email, is you can do email in the evening as well. And so when I wasn't traveling, I would be home for dinner, every night. It might be, and then might be on email later that night or early in the morning. I always liked back then doing email early in the morning and then going for a run and then going into work. Um, but yeah, I was able to be there at least when I wasn't traveling pretty much every dinner.
You mentioned to me you will pull a hamstring if you try to run with your kids these days, and I could probably relate to that. I almost died running with Andrea last week. She was going so fast for 10 miles. At what point in your fatherhood did you realize that your kids were you mentioned like trying to hammer early on? Like at what age was Jordan where he started, dropping you on runs, and how much of an ego check was that for you?
Yeah, probably sophomore year because I was younger then. But there was a point when we were like exactly the same, and so when we go race, it'd be super competitive in a local 5K, which was awesome. It was so much fun. But then I went downhill and he kept going uphill. I paced him at one point. I think it may have been seventh or eighth grade. I can't remember. He didn't break 6 minutes in the mile that season. Almost got there, and so I went out and paced him through 3 minutes. And I literally did pull my hamstring. It turned black and blue. It was pulled so bad. But he broke 6 minutes. But I think around then, like seventh, eighth grade, I was like, I can't do it. It's nice because then the girls started running. When Jordan graduated, Jordan actually ran at Furman for Chris Neal, which is super cool.
Right.
When he graduated, Andrew and Olivia were freshmen, and they started running. And when Jordan graduated, I'm like, oh, that was a great gift. I'm done with running now. I have no reason to be involved. And Andrew and Olivia start running. I'm like, this is awesome. I get to be involved in another 4 years. Now it's become 9 years.
I mentioned this a minute ago. I know your kids are going to listen to this one. So as we start to wrap up, 4 kids, can you mention each one, and each one specifically, how they have had an impact on you within your life, one by one?
Oh my gosh. Jordan is the first, so you learn everything on Jordan. He's like the guinea pig of the family. And Jordan is very thoughtful, and he has taught me how to be thoughtful, good communicator. He challenges my thinking. And he is an amazing husband. Honestly, I look at him now and I learn how to be a better husband. He's married now, but you learn how to be a better husband because he's such a wonderful husband. Um, Cambria is, she was not the runner. She was more of a dancer, but now she does ultra marathons and trail runs and rock climbing, and she is the adventurer. She is super kind to everyone. And so I think she would teach me kindness and adventure. Um, Next born was Olivia. She was a minute before Andrea. Olivia I would say, is the most like me. I kind of feel like she's a little bit of a mini me. So what Olivia's feeling at different stages, I'm like, oh, I felt that same way at that stage. Um, Olivia, I did never knew Olivia would be a pro runner, but I was super impressed with how she started handling the pressures of competing and how she mentally started embracing competition and pressure and made that help her thrive. I look at that in terms of high stress situations. I think of how Olivia handles those situations so amazingly well. And then Andrea, I think all my kids are incredibly well rounded. Andrea is really good at picking a goal and having a mission and just going after it. I think they all are, but Andrea was usually very vocal about her goals, and she makes them happen and gets after it.
A few more questions here, wrapping up off the top of my head. First one, what's next for you in this next chapter of life? What are you chasing after, whether it's work, family, running? lengthening the miles as the weather's getting nicer? What's on your mind these days?
It's a new phase for us because now all of our kids are out of college. I loved NCAA competing. I love watching the kids, but I love meeting the parents. Like we would host parties before every NCAA meet. Like I feel like a parent that's parenting an NCAA kid, don't focus on your kid, focus on the parents. Get to know the parents, and all those parents are a bundle of nerves. And if you can all come together, it's super fun doing that. This is going to be different for me in the pro world. I've tried to actually start branching out there. I've gotten to know Kyle Valby really well. I've gotten to know Mark Ramsden really well. I like getting to know the other parents. I've made reconnections with people like Mark Burns. I know you've
I
had
just
Connor
texted
Burns
him
on
this
here,
morning
Mark
because I'm going
Burns.
to see him later this week. Yeah.
Oh, did you? He was a great buddy of mine. We ran against each other a lot in college, and then we lived in Chicago together. Short story on Mark Burns. When he graduated college, he started selling Russell Stovers. He was responsible for Russell Stover candies in Chicago. Best buddy to have because he'd always bring candies over to the house. But reconnecting with those people that are still in the running world has been just super fun for me. I'm CEO of a company now. Started here a couple years ago, and got a lot to accomplish as that job. We have about 1,000 people, so I feel a responsibility to make sure those 1,000 people have great careers and great experiences at the company. And then, my wife and I like to travel. We went to Europe this summer and saw Olivia race in Sweden, which was awesome. So we'll have to figure out this next stage of no kids in college and figure out what we do with our time. But I think those would be the areas. Get to know the other pro athlete parents, hang out with them, and then work and travel.
Final serious question for you. For those who have listened to our conversation, what would be the final takeaway message that you want to leave with them today?
Oh gosh. I think the final takeaway message is there's a lot in this world that go after. Like, don't make it all about running. Running is an awesome thing to have. It's a great experience. It's super fun, but your life is not running. Your life, I think the best life lived is a well-balanced life where you have a variety of things that are in there that you're growing from, that you're helping others from, and you're learning from. So running is awesome. It's a tool. You'll have it the rest of your life. It'll be amazing, but it's not your only thing in life.
Final question for you. The question I ask every single guest on every single episode. I know you've listened to the podcast before, so you're probably expecting it.
Oh, I didn't prepare for this one.
You've been very quick on a lot of these that are way more deep, so I have no doubt you'll answer it. If you had Gordon Ramsay coming over to your house for dinner, what would you choose to make for him?
Yeah, I didn't even think about this one, but I think kind of my go-to dish is Moroccan chicken. So you take a chicken, you butterfly it, you bake it on cast iron skillets. You put a skillet on the bottom, a skillet on the top, so it bakes both sides. You put Moroccan spices on it, bakes both sides really well. And then you take what my kids call trail mix couscous. You take Israeli couscous, which is like pearled couscous, and you take a bunch of dried fruit, blueberries, cranberries, whatever you like, and nuts, walnuts, pistachios. You grill those a little bit. You mix them all together. Put that on the plate, and then put the chicken on top of that. And then the other go-to Markezich dish is broiled broccoli. You take broccoli, put some olive oil on it, put it in the broiler, broil that, put that on the side. That would be my go-to.
Sounds good. That's complex. I can already tell you cook a few dishes at family Thanksgiving every year with that as quite the. I wouldn't even know where to start. You just like.
I can send you the rest.
I don't know why you're stressing about that question. Awesome. You knew. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. Really appreciate it. Love this one. So many gems talking about old school running all the way up to parenting and your successful work life. Thank you so much for this conversation. And yeah, your kids are awesome too. They've provided not just amazing episodes on the podcast, but also are just such quality people. And that is always a reflection of the parents and how they were raised. So keep up the great work, and we'll have to chop it up again soon.
Well, thanks, Dominic. And I got to say, you're doing great things with the running effect. You're great things for the running community and great things for people. So, I love how you bring visibility to people that may not have had visibility before, which is awesome. So great work. Thank you for doing it.